Basically, the size of it, there's not enough to watch. But I need like 3 or 4 months and then buy it for a month. Okay, come on in again. Hopefully you fixed the handout on your way through. Like I mentioned, these are for the first 5 or 6 weeks. One for today on transforming XML, and then the ones for the weeks after on jQuery, servlets, Ajax, that sort of thing. Hopefully all set up for it there. Now you've got the camera working okay for recording lectures, so if you do miss one, I'll have them available online for it. Last week we started to cover the parsing, XML parsing and the like. I did add an extra thing in towards the end of the week, one of the labs, on some of the lecture examples. The lecture slides have got some XML examples and parsing in there. I've just grabbed those and put them as a zip file available for it. I'll try and do that each time, but I've realised that sometimes people want to just run the demos out of the labs. So I've done the same thing for this week's ones, just put any XML and XSL there. You can grab one of the handouts on your way past if you want a copy of them. Give you an idea just of the things are now working. I have started uploading some of the videos just as an example. If you wanted to, like, there's some of the. This was from one of the labs just last week. I won't be videoing the labs in general. That was just to make sure I got the camera working. But as I say, if you do want to get hold of them, they should be available. That's just for one of the mobile app development ones to sort of get hold of. Having a look at today, a follow on to last week, where we're going to look at something called XML transforms. Last week we looked at reading in XML documents using Java. So you can read your XML documents and then extract out the individual bits of information that you might be interested in. Now we've been doing this quite a lot in JavaScript as well. Just for example, there's a link that I'll put up on the sort of main page. The W3C site, the web sort of school site, W3 school site. They've got a few nice examples of parsing as well, and they've got an example about how you might do it in using JavaScript. For example, last week we were getting elements by a tag name and getting the child nodes and picking out individual names. We'll be doing a similar thing in JavaScript when we're doing the Ajax. But this is here's just to show you that it's the same sort of interface for it. We've got these things like get element by ID, get elements by a tag name, and get individual sort of elements of it. So what you're doing in Java will translate across to doing it in C#, doing it in JavaScript, doing it in the sort of whole lot of them. You just learn a generic interface to parsing XML, and you'll find you can do the same sort of thing in a variety of languages. So if you're on a bit of backup to parsing some XML, yeah, there's a bit here on the XML parser, the XML DOM, that's just on the W3C site. And also what we're doing today, this bit on XSLT. These style transforms. Now parsing is relatively straightforward. It's tricky the first time you do it, as you might have sort of seen in your lab exercise, how you're sort of searching for particular tags, and then you get the bit that's sort of just in the middle part to it, the actual data part to it. Typically XML used as a transfer document between web services, and the person receiving this, in this case say a JavaScript function, they want to be able to extract out the bits of data. Now we've got ways of doing it both for XML and for JSON. We'll be looking at both to doing it, because you will come across both sort of types of text wrapper, if you like it there. But today I just want to have a look at the transforming XML. So these are the sort of slides that you've got. The way that we've looked at it so far is we've done it very programmatically. You've used things like your usual loops and if statements, and you scan through, and that's the way that you were used to doing things in sort of programming terms. XSLT is a different approach to it, not as widely used, but is on the same sort of ballpark, if you like, as CSS, as style sheets to doing it. They don't really have a programmatic approach to do it. They do it by pattern matching. And they say, whenever you come across this particular pattern, then do this. For anybody who might have done regular expressions in one of the other modules, and certainly you'll be doing them in Emma Norling's compiler module, if you're sort of doing that one, you'll come across quite a bit of that. So this particular section is just going to be mainly about XSLT, but just at the start, a little bit about namespaces, just as to fill in a couple of gaps for it. We're starting to use the equivalent of different libraries in XML. Like you use libraries in Java, and you have this import statement, and you bring in somebody's jar file, or you bring it in off a certain website. We've got similar things for XML. We're going to have XML that's described on a particular website and need to bring it in. And sometimes the tags that they use are going to be the same name. Rather, again, you can have the same thing in Java classes. You can have one class being imported that's got the same class name as something else, and you've got a bit of a name conflict. And the way that XML gets around one of these problems is using these things called namespaces. You have the same thing in databases. You might sort of pick out something called emp name from one table, and then a completely different table, but that also happens to have got a column called emp name, and you need to differentiate between the two. And the way that you do that in sort of databases is you say it's the database name dot emp name, or the other database name dot emp name. Similar sort of approach in XML, where you can combine markup from different XML, and you might need to sort of group some things together. So these namespaces are the standard ways of doing it, and they're typically represented by an attribute that just decides to name the namespace that you want for it. They use either a URL, which is what we're all sort of familiar with, a URL pointing to a site, or a URN, just a resource name. A URL typically points to a particular document. This might point to a sort of a general resource being available to it. Effectively the same sort of thing for it. But the namespace is used just as like a prefix. So you have, again, if you think of the database idea, you can have a database table dot the column name. And we have a similar thing with a prefix for whichever schema it comes from in the first place with one of these prefixes, and it just differentiates that particular element from other ones. Easy to see with an example. So, for example, the vector graphics descriptions for XML and the math library, they have both got something called a set attribute, or a set type for it. Maths has got the math set, if you like, and the vector graphics thing has got a set inside. So they've both got their own tags. And the way in which you differentiate one from the other is just to say, well, I'm using the set out of this one, or I'm using the set out of this. So you will occasionally in these tags see quite sort of elongated names where you've got the actual tag, but prefixing that is the library that it comes from. the set that it comes from. So you might have a combination of things with multiple namespaces being within it. And at the start of the document, you just name your namespace that you're going to use inside it. So there, for example, I'm declaring this namespace that's available over at the W3 schools, the W3 organisation, one for XHTML, another one for Xlink. And later on, I can then use these tags to say, okay, well, this, when I talk about XMLNS, I'm talking about this site for it. So I can then use that just as a shorthand to say that's what I'm importing for it. So I might have one here, an SVG sort of tag, an ellipse tag, a rectangle tag. All these are sort of tags coming out of one particular library. I think it's the SVG one to define graphics. But you'll see that just means that either I can say everything in this document is from this particular set. So if you don't find it, assume it's in this namespace. That's if you can just sort of do like a global declaration and say if you don't recognise a tag, it's in here at the start, this namespace for